Hello, hope all is well, and welcome to another episode of Pimp My Preset. This time we're going to be looking at a modern Marshall style preset that was sent in by Karl, who also coined the name of this video series. Now, just a quick disclaimer, these of course are suggestions I'm putting forward for the preset in question, and tone is subjective after all. So take these as sort of like ideas, and maybe they can apply to the preset you're trying to build as well. So here's what we're looking at today. Here's one I use for general rock stuff, has scenes for rhythm, heavy, lead, and a chorused heavy sound. Phase, flange, and boost up front. I'd be interested what you'd do with it. Cheers and thanks for the shout out. Guitar I used was a PRS Custom 22 with the 8515 pickups. So there's the preset and the four scenes that have been in use. So a normal kind of rhythm tone, a heavy rhythm tone, a lead tone, and then a chorus heavy tone as well that has some delay. So you can use that for leads as well. And the thing here is that, it sounds great off the bat. There's a few things going on underneath the hood per se as I had a look through this. So we'll take a look at that and then a few suggestions for things to try out. And maybe some tweaks that can be done to further, I guess, improve on the tone or change the tone depending on what you're after. So we'll first start with the amp block itself. So we're using a Spawn OD1-1, and I use the Spawn OD2-1 in my main preset. So yeah, I'm quite familiar with this amp or this type of amp per se, and it's the sort of tone that I really like and go for. So the modern Marshall style of tone, and it's quite mid-forward as we can see here. And something else that's in here is on the output EQ. We're tucking back 125 on the, so it's lower mids or around that kind of chuggy area, I guess, to clear things up a bit. And then we're also boosting around the 1 to 2K area over here. Now this will be down to taste, basically, the amp you're using and the kind of, well, the setup you're using as well. I've noticed, for example, and this is a suggestion which would be an additional block, which would be using a multiband compressor to control this area, which you've taken off over here. And then these tweaks that can also be guitar dependent. Now, this guitar, I mean, it's an SG. It's the closest thing I have, I guess, to sort of a mahogany style guitar with those kind of pickups. But the SG, of course, is going to be a bit more mid-forward. So the thing here is we're boosting via the output EQ between 1 and 2K. And then we're also, the amp itself has quite a bit of mids in there as well. So depending on the kind of setup, for me, I find that this is maybe a bit too much or a bit too forward. And that means that I would, for example, if I'm tweaking for this guitar, I would actually zero out the output EQ, and then I'd look at maybe using just the mids control to see how the guitar sits, and then look at things like EQ again afterwards. One thing I'd suggest to try, which I've done on my main preset recently, is if you go to the Ideal tab and activate the bright switch, it gives you a different kind of, I guess, not response, but sort of brilliance to the tone. Obviously bright, that's kind of what it stands for. And it can be a really cool thing to try out compared to using a higher presence dial, and you might get something out of it. I certainly did on my main preset. So I'll do a quick test here with the output EQ on and off, and then also with the bright switch here on and off, and I'll keep everything else the same. And the only thing I'll do just based on this guitar is that I'll lower the mids a touch. So I'll lower this down to 6. And I like the bright switch on this and what it's doing to the actual tone itself. Now the thing here with this EQ is that it works. I kind of like what it's doing, but I do find that it can be a bit fatiguing on the ears, especially with this guitar. So what I'll do here, and this will be with other tweaks that come in mind, is that I will zero this out, and then we'll stick with the bright switch on, and then I've lowered the mids a touch there, and then we'll go along and look at other possible tweaks that we could do. And so in the cab block, we're looking at 2 dynamic mics on a Friedman GB cab, so greenback cab. And in the preamp tab, I see you've also got the modern preamp selected. And we're looking of a low and a high cut around, well, 90 on the low cut, 6K on the high cut. And something I'd suggest maybe trying out, which can be cool, is adding some drive and saturation to the mic preamp model. I really like using the mic preamp tab, and I usually use modern as well. My low and high cuts are maybe a bit higher, but it depends, of course, on the style of music you're playing and, you know, personal taste, I think. But you can get a different kind of vibe to the tone if you use a bit of drive and saturation to the actual preamp. So I'll give a quick example of what we're talking about. So I'll play a quick riff with the changes I've made to the amp, and then I'll just show how the drive and saturation can really kind of enhance that tone. And so for the cab section, we're using 2 Friedman GB cabs, dynamic mics. I think it sounds great. The thing here is that, you know, if you're using a stereo setup, it might be an idea to hard pan them left and right to get a wider tone. And now for the reverb, I see that it's on across all the different scenes. And I guess it's just there for a bit of ambience, which is cool, that's great. Thing here is you can add more spread and move it up to 100% to sort of make it fill out a bit more. You've got some CPU to spare, so you could also actually go up to normal, which won't take that much more. And the thing here I see on the EQ, you could also put a low cut on the reverb EQ here to sort of clean things up a bit on the lower frequencies. It's not something that's really apparent, but it can add up, especially when you've got other modulation, delays and things like that going on as well. And something else here is on the reverb type itself. I think this is just down to taste. I might go, since it's been used for ambience, for the ambience reverb instead, but both are fine. Now we're in the second scene here. As you can hear, there's still some kind of noise. It might be down to my guitar, but in the input block, and I'll just switch back to scene one, we've got the input gate. I'm not sure if you have something else maybe going on the board, but I think you're just using the gate that's in the Fractal unit. And this is probably dialed into your guitar. For this, for example, it's a bit noisier. I think these are, well, there's less wax potting on the pickups. So I need a bit more noise reduction. And what I'd suggest is, yes, you can look at upping the threshold, but what you can also do here, which can be quite useful, is actually just upping the ratio. So as you can see, the higher I turn up the ratio, the more it's going to reduce, well, the noise, if that makes sense. So the more this is actually reduced. So a quick example of that here, got the guitar all the way open. So when it's at a 2 ratio, you can hear that. And as I turn up, it will push that down even more. And so that's something else that you can tweak to sort of get the level of, or the amount of noise reduction that you want going on. So for me in this instance, I'd probably put the ratio up to say, let's say 8, and I'll leave the threshold as is, and we'll see how that kind of pans out for the heavier scenes. So now on the lead scene with the delay, this is a really cool kind of utilization of like 2 different tempos. So I usually use like a tap tempo, but I guess these are sort of, well-known values, I guess, to some extent, to get that kind of feel, a different feel, sorry, on one side and then on the other. And the thing here that I noticed is that it's very dark sounding. I'm not sure if that's, for example, to sort of keep it out of the way when you're soloing or when you're doing lead lines. And the thing here is that definitely works, but the offshoot of this is that it can kind of like muddy things up to some extent. So because this is very dark sounding, and you've also got the reverb that's there, obviously we've cleaned things up a bit with the low cut, it can kind of contribute to that kind of like muddy sound that's kind of in the back. So what you can do instead is within the More tab, you can use the ducker instead. So I would suggest you can keep these values and then experiment with anything between 4 to 6 or even 10 decibels of attenuation. So I'll use 4 here. And then underneath the EQ, I would probably put the high cut frequency higher up, and I would also put the low cut frequency a bit higher as well. And I'll also pull back the mix a bit by doing this. So because we've got the EQ that's going to be brighter, but I'm using some, ducking to hold it back, to keep things clear, I'll also pull back the mix at the same time. So you'll still get an almost prominent delay sound, but it'll be a lot cleaner. I tend to like values between maybe 17 and 20 for the delays, and I usually go for parallel, but in this case, this is fine, of course. So I'll do a quick test here of like a before and after. I'll try my best and play the same lick. So you can hear that it's a lot more hi-fi, I guess. And again, this is something that's just purely down to taste. If you prefer a darker sounding delay, it's all good. And now onto the fourth scene, and this is basically the heavy sound. So it's the boosted amp, and then a CE2 chorus. I think this sounds great, to be honest. And the thing here, along with these extra tweaks now that we have, that is with the cleaner, brighter sounding delay and also the reverb, we also have a cleaner sounding, per se, chorus track as well. So I'll do a quick example of the fourth scene now. So along with these other tweaks, we now have a cleaner sounding, I guess, or a more hi-fi sounding fourth scene or chorus track. So I'll play a riff through this and then the initial preset just afterwards. So I hope that gives some idea of the kind of tweaks or the direction that we're going in. Because sometimes there's a few tweaks that you can do that can help with certain things, but it can really help, I find sometimes, is that when you're tweaking various settings or a lot of settings, is to have some idea of like, okay, this is the sound that I have now, and what are the different things I'd like to do or things I'd like to change to get more close to like the, not final tone per se, because we're always going to be tweaking stuff, but a tone where, you know, I'd like more of this within my sound. And for me in this case, and to some extent it was due to the guitar that I was using, it was a case of softening the mids to some extent, and then also cleaning up the modulation that's been used and the reverb so that a lot of those things are clearer in the process. Now, as the last thing to try, and that would be using a multi-band compressor block. So in this preset, I'm not sure if we have quite enough CPU left, but if I set this down to Eco, we should have enough to put in the multi-band compressor. And this is going to be something that, I mean, it's very useful, I find, for very heavy styles of music. And in standard tuning and with this guitar and through this setup, I'm not sure if it's absolutely needed, but I'll do a before and after with the multi-band compressor in with the sort of Andy Sneap trick kind of settings to give you some idea of what that would do to a preset like this. So I'll make some extra space to make this work, and essentially we're just adding the multi-band compressor before the end here, and as we've maxed out the amount of space that we have, we'll move these down below and we'll move these across, and then we'll add feedback send and return to make things work. So just make sure it's feedback send 1 and return 1 as well, and then we'll set this to 100% on the return so these two blocks work. So I'll just do that now. I'll connect these together, and then we'll add a multi-band compressor over here. And then for the multi-band compressor, I've loaded something from the library, and this was actually from Leon Todd's library blocks, I believe. And what we're doing here, and it's very simple, is that we're disabling the low and the high compressor here per se, and we're only activating the compressor that's looking at the lower mids. And that's all it's really doing. So I'll hook this up now on the preset so that we get some sound going. And I'll play some examples with the multi-band compressor on and off. I find it really useful on kind of, well, the heavy or the metal stuff that I do, because when we're chugging with a lot of gain, there's a lot of build-up in that area, and that really helps to give the kind of clarity. In this case, I think, at least in standard tuning, it's not something I think that you necessarily need. So I would probably, in this case, leave it out of this preset. I'll just revert to the save version I had. And then in the process, we're saving CPU, which means that we can go for normal quality of reverb. We could even put this to high, but then we're hitting like 77%, which isn't ideal. But the thing here as well, as we have a bit more CPU, I'd suggest staying below a certain limit, so maybe 77, 78% to be on the safe side. But we have options here of either upping the quality of the reverb, since it's something that's always on, and also in the cab section within preamp, we could probably also put this to high quality. And yeah, that gets us to around 76%, which I think would be fine in this case. So I'll just quickly show the difference, and it might be more subtle, between economy mode and high quality within the preamp type. So the thing here is that the difference is pretty subtle, I think, but you'll kind of notice it more by playing. And I feel that you can really kind of hear it more in kind of like the treble or the highs per se, like they seem nicer. I don't know if that's the best term to use here, but it's something that you can kind of feel and you kind of notice in those highs, at least for me. And if I can, I really like to use the mic preamp in high quality mode. So there we go. I hope that gave you some ideas on things to try or things to tweak further in your own preset. I'll just give a quick kind of rundown of the things that I did, or at least the direction of the things that I did. And that was to sort of pull back the mids, as I felt it was maybe a bit too pushed, and especially with this guitar, it can get quite grating on the ear, especially at a longer gig. And in the process as well, some minor tweaks on the amp, for example, putting on the bright switch, which I feel really adds something to these Spawn models, especially these kind of like modded Marshall kind of tones, which I think for me at least works really well. Within the cab block, we panned both cabs, hard left and hard right. Again, this depends on your setup, if you're running stereo or mono. And then in the preamp block, we messed with the drive and saturation to add a bit more character, and we put the preamp mode on high quality. I left the filters as is, as it sounded quite good. Again, these are things that you can mess around with and see what works best for you. And then on the modulation and the delay, we looked at changing the EQ in there. So we added some low cut, and we upped the high cut as well to make it sound clearer. And then we're using a ducker to kind of clear things up, as well as lowering it in the mix. And on the reverb block, to finish up, we increased the spread here. I changed it to ambience mode. I left the mix as is, and on the EQ as well, we upped the low cut frequency there as well. We can also mess with the high cut frequency as well. I believe, yeah, the default value is at 5 kilohertz, and that can be quite nice with the tone as well. Again, this is something to taste, of course, and the sort of thing that you're going for. So there we go. I hope that was useful. Just a quick note on submissions, because the only way I can keep doing this and the only way this works is through submissions. So if you'd like to submit your preset for me to look at and do a video like this one, you can send it to pimpmypreset@gmail.com. You know, very simple email address, and I'll put further information in the description box below. And these are sort of videos and things that I can do maybe once a month or more, but I can only do this if you know, I've got presets and things to work on. I have a few more kind of lined up, but I would love to hear from you and to hopefully try and help you on the preset that you're trying to build as well. In any case, thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care.